Hey, lovelies. Nicole Bell here, and I'm so excited to have you join me for this season of the Soul Guided Book Club. We're starting a new series where I interview thought leaders and everyday professionals about the books that have made the biggest difference in their lives. If you love conversations like this, I'd love to have you go to www.soulguidedbookclub.com. There you can join in for our live virtual book club sessions on personal finance, spirituality, relationships, fitness, and so much more. If you want to take the concepts from your favorite personal development and spirituality books and actually apply them to your life this year, there's no better place to do it than in supportive community. Join today at www.soulguidedbookclub.com and let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Soul Guided Book Club podcast. I'm here today with Chris Wasko, and Chris is an energy healer, a spiritual counselor, and a psychic medium who helps old souls and survivors of narcissistic abuse heal and evolve. Her work focuses on trauma recovery and nervous system regulation. Chris is the author of An Old Soul's Journey, a guide for inner child healing and transformation. Today, Chris and I are going to chat about her book, her work, and also the book The Mother Wound by Monica Carles. Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you. I immediately resonated with all of your work online. So I'm so excited to chat about this because it sometimes can be a heavy topic for folks. But then, of course, I think those of us who are on our healing journey begin to look forward to diving into these topics and, of course, feeling the resolution and the peace that can come from it.
Yeah, definitely. Or we're dragged through it. But either way, I think we're doing it one way or another, right?
Amen. Amen. I'm one of those people, I'm like, what's the quote where I'm grateful for the hole I dug myself because when it got too painful, I had to dig myself out.
It's a good one. It's a good
Yeah.
one. So true.
Yes, exactly. So, yes, I had to dig myself out, and a lot of us are in that situation. But the mother wound. So, first things first, I would love to know your conceptualization or how you would describe the mother wound to somebody who's not initiated to the topic.
I feel the mother wound is such a personal thing because it really stems from not having a healthy relationship with your own mother. And that could be for many reasons. It doesn't even mean you necessarily knew her. I mean, there are people that were adopted that will deal with a mother wound differently from than someone who has experienced it because they have a challenging relationship with their mother. But the way I tend to look at it is as an energy. So the mother wound often shows up in the chakra system, most often, as I see it, in the heart chakra, because it really does show that wounding and it also carries the energy of what a mother is. So there's a lot of lack to that wound, and it's up to us to fill that and really to find what the lack is within us.
Wow. Okay, that is fascinating. And I mean, to get right to it, I myself experienced a lot of challenges with my own mother. And she, in my adult years, was in a really bad car accident and experienced a traumatic brain injury. And fortunately, I have done so much healing work since then, so it's comfortable for me to talk about. But during that season, it's very interesting to me that you say about the heart because specifically, when she had her accident, I had done a lot of personal development work, a lot of healing about my family of origin issues, and would have described myself as very empowered. I had at that point started to do a lot of leadership training. I was coaching. I was very into the personal development world. And so when my mom had her accident, my thought was that, oh, we're going to fix this, we're going to heal this. I sort of turned into that captain save my mom. I call it enlightened codependency. And so then at that time, I was really fully into positive thinking. And especially with a traumatic brain injury, it takes about 2 years to heal from. And I guess I should say 2 years from the accident to know what your prognosis will actually be. And so some people have a 95% recovery, some people have a 5% recovery, and it's just a wait and see. And so through that season, I was so devoted to helping my mom with her recovery and being really involved in that. And if you had asked me, I would have said, I'm doing great. I'm thinking positively. And then there came this certain point where my chest, and so as you mentioned, that heart chakra, it was just like I had a stone on my chest and I could barely breathe from the stress. And actually, I got to this point where it felt like I was breathing out of a straw for most of the time because there was so much pain there. There was so much tightness and heaviness. And so it's just fascinating to me right off the get-go that you say it's associated with the heart chakra.
And I appreciate you sharing that too, because that is that physical manifestation of it. And feeling it physically, oftentimes someone with a mother wound will really struggle with female relationships and friendships. And it's a result of that. But you experienced it very much in this feeling in your chest, and that energy is ultimately what was going on with you, because your heart chakra was being depleted so much that the pressure was becoming too intense, and it was your body trying to fill it. So your other chakras would have then been trying to help. So it's always the adjoining ones, so that your throat chakra and your solar plexus would have probably really been working hard to help it. So while that's wonderful that the chakras work as the system and help support each other, but it can also weaken the other chakras along with it. So working on the ones we know have those intense wounds is incredibly helpful to help support our energy, and especially as we move forward in filling those empty aspects that have formed over time, or in your case, through a traumatic experience.
Okay, that is really interesting. You're really spot on because yeah, that is what I experienced myself is probably a challenge with my throat chakra really speaking and expressing my truth powerfully. And even that solar plexus chakra where that will, that power to move projects forward. And I did. I felt like I was stagnating during that season and sort of spinning my wheels. And that would make sense because everything was going to that area of my life pouring into that, but at the same time, maybe having a challenge moving my own life forward. So that for me was very much that element of the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
And we think that we can mentally process and escape our trauma and our challenges. But fortunately for me, that is when I got very into body-centered trauma processing and healing. And I know that actually, I mean, I know that in your own work, you work with people in kind of a similar way as far as nervous system reprocessing and helping people who are considered old souls. How would you describe that you kind of apply this to your own work?
Yeah, well, a lot of it does work with the chakras because I have the ability to see into the chakra system. So that's probably my most popular service right now. I say popular just because it tends to be how people find me. Oh, my friend got this chakra read with you, and I want to do it too. And it really was just an evolution in this work, because when I started, I was really working, it was more just a lot of counseling and feeling the energy and seeing and working with a lot of clairs. But then when I started actually seeing in people's chakras, it was kind of an amazing process. So I basically like go in, I'm essentially like walking through the energy body and seeing what the body wants to share, because the body is always willing to tell a story within boundaries. I always respect energetic boundaries and never will push through any that say no thank you, because there are chakras that will be blocked. And in order to at least validate why there's a blockage, because it could almost sound like I'm making it up, like, oh, this one's blocked, I can't get in. I'll just say something, well, this one's blocked, let's see if it will allow for opening through some processes that I've learned to use over time. And I'll be able to say, okay, this one is blocked for this reason. And the person can pretty much always accept that as, oh, I understand why that's happening. Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, being able to do that really helps to hone in on what's going on in the body, because the body as an energy, it's always presenting itself in layers. And the outward most layer, meaning the one that is revealed first, if you will, is the one that's asking for the most attention. So you can start there is essentially what I like to do of like, okay, this is the chakra that's kind of screaming at me. Because sometimes I like to start at the root and work my way up to the crown, but sometimes I'll just have a chakra kind of shouting out already. And I'm like, okay, normally I start here, but your throat is screaming at me right now. So we're going to start there. And I just trust what the body is sharing. So it's a lot of fun because no session is ever the same, but it's so incredible how everyone can understand what I'm saying, but also in some ways not understand it because I'll say things that they've never heard of, but also be able to take it. Like, for example, I told this one woman, I'm like, I see the Fae in your root chakra. And she's like, what's the Fae? And I said, are you familiar with like fairies and gnomes? And she's like, oh, yeah, I've heard of them. And I said, okay, that's Fae energy. I said, so she's like, but what does that mean? I said, well, from what they're telling me, you're very good with plant life. You really flourish in a garden, and I don't think would ever do well if you didn't have a garden, especially near where you live. She's like, I'm in my garden every day. And I was like, well, that's so cool because I didn't know that. It's what her body said. So it's really neat how the body does that.
Oh, okay. That is very, very cool. And there's a few things that did stick to me that you said where specifically around this idea that sometimes they're blocked and then you want to respect that. And I do not think that sounds like a cop out at all. And I actually think that's important in the field that we realign or re-educate clients to respect the wisdom of the body. And that's something that I do in my sessions as well, where I do a fair amount of parts work and the somatic work. And so, what I always share is that you have an inner knowing in your system, and it's smarter than you or me on the intellectual level. And so, that I think is a huge part of re education for clients because I do think a lot of, unfortunately, in my opinion, a lot of coaches do try to bypass or push past some of those energetic boundaries, psychic boundaries. And to me, what that is doing is actually very detrimental for the long run because what you're doing is you're undermining the client's self-sovereignty and you're undermining their own system such that, yeah, in the moment, there can sometimes be that like a cathartic aspect or something that happens or shifts that can be very powerful. But I think over time, it can be really problematic.
Yeah, I believe that's so beautifully stated because learning to respect our own boundaries is really also about respecting the energy of those boundaries and what they're saying. And the body will say a lot, even if it doesn't allow us entry. I have yet to have a chakra that hasn't allowed entry, but I've had some that will kind of vet me before I enter. And I'll feel that. And but that tells me a lot about the person. Like that, so if I'm about to walk into someone's heart chakra and I feel like I've been fully vetted at the door like by a bouncer, I'll look at what that looks like, feels like, all have all the clear senses tap into that, and it tells me about the person of how they probably are in life and what their body then does already for them. So it's really a fascinating process. But yeah, to be able to really honor that sovereignty and help people connect to that is a beautiful part of healing.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I have noticed that as well, where, and even if you are, in my experience, working with a blocked aspect, that can be so beautiful and really lead to a lot of beautiful unfolding there. So it is really interesting. Now, I want to know more about your history. And but before I go there, in terms of the chakras as well, it's really interesting what you mentioned about understanding and seeing that with a person. And it now actually something just clicked for me is that I'm in a season of increasing my visibility and leadership and expanding my voice. And so I myself have been really doing a lot to work on my throat chakra. And at the same time, what I'm also in a season is, just to be straightforward, I would call it pruning friendships,
Mm.
where friendships that don't align with me, social situations that I don't want to be in, I'm being very mindful about the circumstances that I put myself in Because, of course, certainly I could go into this social situation and that friendship and just spill my guts about what I really think. Or what I can do is I can opt out and I can say, no, I'm going to decline that invitation. And again, it's because what I don't want to do is put myself into situations where I feel like I have to censor myself and then not really speak my truth out of a desire to be cordial and social, maybe where it wouldn't be appropriate to give my opinion because it's a casual social gathering and they sometimes didn't ask my opinion. But for me, it's more so that I really want to be in situations where I can really clearly let that channel come through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and this year, especially because it was the year of the wood snake, is a huge year for that because snakes shed. So a lot of us are seeing that we're shedding not just relationships, but that's a big one, but aspects of ourself, aspects of our life. Relationships is a big one. And as we are slowly but surely getting toward the year of the fire horse, like you're gonna be feeling a lot of that success because of what you allowed your body to shed, what you allowed your energy to shed. So, while in some cases there's probably aspects of mourning in that because it could be sad to be losing some relationships and friendships. I know I've dealt with that personally as well, but knowing that, okay, this is for the highest and best good of all, and just connect myself to that principle allows me to move forward through that mourning process and know that it's working out because it is. But it does get me that much more excited though for the fire horse because I'm like, are we done shedding yet? Because I'm done. I'm done.
Amen. I am right there with you. I do. I resonate deeply with that. I feel like this has very much been a shedding year for me, and I'm ready for the fire horse year. So I am preparing and getting myself ready for this year. And with that said, I am so curious. So, in terms of the work that you do with old souls, survivors of narcissistic abuse, and you mentioned working in the chakras, I know that you're a psychic medium. And so I'd love to know more about your journey to discovering your gifts, as well as how you touched a little bit on how you work with people, but I'd love to know in more detail sort of your offerings and what that looks like.
Yeah, my getting to this is almost comical because if you knew me back then, I was very different yet still the same because my background's in business. I was working in New York City. Both my parents met on Wall Street. I was groomed to be a very different person than I am now. What I started to learn, especially when I became a mother, is how narcissistic my parents were, how deeply wounded they were, and how that has been going on for generation after generation after generation. And unfortunately, I not only come from a family with a lot of emotional abuse, there's also a lot of physical abuse. And my father had hit my first child, and that probably should have been the time I cut them off, but I didn't. I did choose to forgive because I wanted a relationship with my family. I wasn't ready, even though there's a part of me that feels I failed my child, and that was part of my process. But it took another 8 years, and my father threatened to hit my husband, and I said, "I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore." And my first reaction after that was just pure anxiety. I felt anxious for the first time in my life because when you're raised by people like I was, you're scared. What are they going to do to me? How are they going to try and hurt me? I've watched other members of the family cut them off, and how my mother would be like, well, they'll be sorry. Wait and see what we do. And I knew that I was now next. And so my first step was going to therapy, just trying to help myself feel better. Those are my first steps in regulating my nervous system. I didn't know that at the time. I just wanted to feel better. And whatever that meant, I knew I would probably discover through that process. So I did that for a good year. But as I was healing my mind, I was also healing my body. I recognized that the thyroid condition I had had was now starting to heal because I didn't have this connection to my parents anymore. I changed my diet. I was just getting healthier in so many ways. So through this now mind body healing, it ultimately opened me up to spirit. So I would be having conversations with people just as you and I are speaking right now, and I would see someone in my mind's eye behind their back. And at first, I ignored it because I didn't know what to do with that. While I always considered myself intuitive, I would have called myself an intuitive empath. I never would have called myself psychic medium. So that was a little jarring at first, but it kept happening. So I was like, I guess I should probably figure out what they're trying to say because they don't communicate like we do. They don't have bodies. So I had to take classes to learn how to communicate with people in spirit. So early in my journey, I was doing a lot of mediumship. And I think for me, that was just a very foundational part of energy work, as just learning how to work with spirit. Because I don't do a lot of mediumship anymore. I really just evolved into helping people heal from trauma because I, having my own trauma, healed from it, and ultimately leading me to this path. I was able to expand in these gifts and really just help others. And my gifts still continue to expand. And I think that only really validates the fact that I'm on the right path because as I've continued down it, just more amazing things happen. I just feel like constantly blessed by these what seem like new occurrences, but it's really just deeper awakening every time. And it's been amazing.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Wow. I really love that, Chris. And I have to say, I'm just tickled by that because I think that some of my favorite people, and probably how I identify as well, I would almost call it hippies at heart,
Yeah.
where you wouldn't look at me necessarily and think, oh, she's a spiritual girl. But I do have those inclinations. And again, it's not about being one way or another aesthetically or socially or fitting into a box, but it's really about your relationship with spirit. And then
Yes.
how do you incorporate that? And I had a similar healing journey myself where that opened me up to healing my body in a lot of ways and then connecting with God and feeling that everything opening up through this journey. So that is very, very cool. And then you primarily work with people in terms of healing trauma. And is that from this energetic perspective? Do you have a program that you take people through? How does that look?
Yeah, right now I do it as far as just reading energy. And because I work with old souls, I did develop this spicy old souls. It's kind of a system, but it's more of where I help see their energy and help them understand their energy better because we all fit into, yeah, it's kind of like an archetype system when we live in this earth. And there's a lot of archetype systems, but because old souls have so much to their energy because it's not just this lifetime, it's past lifetimes, but they're carrying a lot of that energy in this lifetime and it's helping peel through that and help them understand themselves. But the reason I had titled it Spicy Old Souls is because the acronym for it is SOS. And many old souls really need help. And a lot of us are not very good at asking for it and we usually need to find it ourselves. So usually when people find me, it's because they've been on that journey of discovery already. I don't tend to have people that are super early in their awakening. They've been through a lot of it and they're usually highly intuitive. It's just getting to those deeper nitty-gritty levels. So I deal with a lot of the very dark stuff, which I would say that sounds unfortunate, but honestly, I'm grateful people feel that safe with me. And the only reason that they do is because I had to walk that path myself. And the only one that could ever understand a path like that is one that's walked it themselves. So it's been quite an interesting journey. I do believe I will continue to evolve it so that I can just make a program that people can do without needing me because I just believe old souls really love the self-healing journey and appreciate that. So that is my long-term goal. But for now, I'm at least doing the one-on-one. And I have my Old Souls Journey book out, which helps heal the inner child and work with the inner child. And I'm currently working on a book to help heal around narcissistic abuse. So I just keep going as I'm guided.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, this is so awesome. I love this. And okay, girl, I'm gonna take a detour because I think I am a spicy old soul, girl. Like,
Very nice.
I strongly identify with that. I do think I agree with you that particularly for somebody on a healing journey, you oftentimes encounter where you're like, gosh, I've overcome so much and I feel so healed and whole in so many aspects of my life. And yet you just have that one bugaboo that's like, why can't I figure this area out? And so I would imagine that that's probably, like you said, kind of that old soul conundrum where there's lots of layers to it. All very interesting. All very interesting. Okay, so I do want to circle back around a little bit because there was something that you had mentioned that I found very fascinating about the mother wound, that book by Monica Carles, and specifically the chapter around releasing generational bonds. And this concept, especially, you touched on it where none of these wounds started with us or with the previous generation. And in particular, I think obviously there's always been practices, but people have or have not had access to them. And certainly in the Western world, you can see that disconnect that started to arise between mind and body, particularly, I think it was Descartes back in the day when it was like, I think, therefore I am. And so the feeling body, the physical body started to become divorced from our cognizant body. And so we've seen now the effects of multiple generations of that. And so I'd love to hear you speak to that as far as those healing aspects, because I do think that that's something that old souls are also aware of, is this idea of recognizing these generational traumas. And I know people are talking more and more about healing, even healing our ancestors, doing work like that. But how would you say, kind of like, what's your understanding of all of that?
Well, I like how the book is, it's very much on doing practiced work. There's a little bit of a witchy element to it, but it doesn't have to be for people that don't necessarily align to that. But essentially, when it comes to the mother wound, it is suggested you start with your own mother and kind of work your way up the maternal line, but do it in a feeling manner. So as I feel into my maternal line, like obviously I start with my mother. I knew my grandmother in life. I didn't know past her on the maternal side, but I felt into it. And feeling into that, I just felt one, a lot of abuse, a lot of sadness, alcoholism. Not in my own mother, though, and not in my grandmother. I actually found it in her mother, so my great grandmother, and then just feeling beyond that and just a lot of darkness, a lot of trauma, and a lot of disconnect, like disconnect from feelings, disconnect from self. And it was just sad. So I allowed myself to sit with that. I also found it served me to do it on my paternal side, but not the father line, follow the mother line there. So go to, I knew my grandmother and as well as two great grandmothers on my father's side. So I was able to do this with a lot of generations, a lot of different branches of the tree, and really feel a lot of the pain because it's really what you're feeling. You're not like have to look for the happiness. The pain is easier because you're starting from a wound. So you're in wound energy. And when you're in wound energy, it's easier to find the trail. It like leads to something. It might not even have started somewhere, but well, it always starts somewhere. My point is, you might not find where it started, but you can find the reinforcements. For example, during World War II, my grandfather was in the Navy in World War II. That in itself is experienced trauma. My parents would have gone through Vietnam War times. That is also re-experienced trauma. Jumping back to my great grandparents, they dealt with the Great Depression. That is re-experienced wound trauma. So sometimes you don't even have to feel into it. You could just go into a timeline, look at the history, and look at the trauma that would have happened in their lifetime, how it might have affected them, and if it did. With my family line on both sides, I could find that, yeah, it did. And it just does something. Now, a lot of times this is just living life and this is how life happens. But so many of us know that previous generations were not taught to process trauma. That's still considered kind of an our generation thing. Because my parents are boomers. They poo-poo therapy. It is not considered something that you do unless you're crazy. And I'm definitely been the crazy one in that family and have accepted that role. But that's okay. I am okay with that.
Same.
But yeah, so sitting with that, finding that, and then seeing how that feels in your body. That's how I would kind of extend beyond what the book shows. Where is that in your body? Because it's showing up somewhere for you too. Even if it's not yours to carry, you are carrying it.
Oh my goodness. Yes, yes, and yes. And yeah, I think that that is a great point because I myself, I was sitting in a meditation and I couldn't feel into it exactly, or I can't recall. At the time, I had either this idea that it was either a past life of mine or some generational trauma, where, again, a big part of my journey has been around my voice and expressing myself. And I was sitting and I had this realization that somewhere in my lineage, it was like I could experience this woman being choked.
Choked. I felt it.
Yeah.
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 Yep, I felt it too. Yeah.
And that's even kind of how I will like naturally rest is with my hand on my throat and that.
Yeah.
And then I noticed this feeling of this sensation, I want to say in the 1800s, where this woman being choked. And so it really presenced me to that aspect of all of the trauma that our ancestors went through that even now, like you said, I don't think healing is mainstream yet. I think we are on the cusp of this revolution. It's really exciting, but I still think that for us, it feels mainstream for those of us in these communities. And then unfortunately, we talk to so many people who are don't have access to it or who are not on that path yet. Of course, it's an opportunity, but yeah, if you think about 100 years ago, there was no support group for our grandmothers to go to. There was no therapist. I mean, forget it being something where it was like, oh, you do that if you're crazy. It was just like, no, there's not, like there was Sigmund Freud. So if
Yeah.
you lived in Vienna, you could go get therapy. But other than that, it just wasn't around. And so we are really the ones who get to change the generational curses.
Yes, which is also part of why I work with old souls because in this generation, so many old souls have chosen to be cycle breakers.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely something that I identify with. And then for so many of us in this era as well, where we are doing our own healing work, and then it opens our eyes to our ancestral trauma and the opportunity there, and then even past lives work. And so, what have you seen in some of the clients that you work with when they start to do some of this work with you as far as working with the old soul's journey? Maybe we can talk about that for a moment because how would you describe that in itself? You have the book that you wrote. What's the purpose of the book?
So the book looks and reads like a children's book. So it's very intentional to connect you to your inner child. And I was completely guided in this. I wouldn't say I meditated myself into this, but I literally sat down and I wrote this poem and I heard, this is a book. And I was so excited. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't even know yet it was related to inner child work. All I saw was this poem about what it is to be an old soul and thinking this will just be very encouraging for people. But I was able to find an illustrator that like saw my vision through my words, which was so incredibly beautiful. And she brought it to life. And I loved it. The final product, I felt so connected to. So when I work with people using the book, I want them to read it and I want them to read it out loud because our voice has resonance. It has healing resonance. I mean, if you talk to anyone who's psychic or a medium like me, we can climb into your energy just as we hear you speak. It helps us climb in a little more. We don't have to, obviously, within respecting boundaries, but same with healing. Your voice means something. So that's why reading it out loud. And then I also have a workbook that goes with it that right now I just give it to people like here, you're walking this path, you're doing this work, go further because we always have the ability to go further. So I give them the workbook to really just climb in a little deeper and really get to those heart elements. But I will say that it really brings people to tears because when we are especially starting with inner child healing, it often makes us cry just seeing this version of us because when we see that version of ourselves, we always see ourselves at a certain age. We can picture, it's usually a photograph that we remember, an outfit we know. So we'll see ourselves at that time in that outfit. So we'll see this version of us. And then what tends to happen is everything that version of us is about to experience. And that makes us cry because we want to save them. We want to protect them. We feel so sorry for what he or she are about to go through. And it's really cathartic to be able to process that, to express that, to get that out. Be sad, allow yourself that, and then go deeper. Let that version of you've got them. You're there now because you're doing the work that you're meant to do, and you're doing it in honor of them, in honor of yourself. So being led on through this myself has been rather incredible because, like I said, I literally just sat one day and I wrote this poem, not knowing what it was going to lead to, but knowing it's helping people heal. I'm honored to be part of that. And it's always a matter of what one is willing to do for themselves. But even if it means just reading it once, it still does something. It resonates somewhere.
Oh, wow. That is so beautiful, Chris. Thank you. As I think about that, you're exactly right. Even as you said that, I thought I could imagine that little Nikki with her blonde bangs and her pigtails and the little ring of chocolate cake batter around her mouth in the photo that I was thinking of. And then, yes, you're exactly right. That instinct of love and then also sadness for the things that she would go through is just right there. So it is really powerful work. And I love that you took that different approach because it does feel like instinctually, I'm not a scientist in this area, but it feels like it would bypass certain parts of the brain that we're so used to using around logic and even healing. Like you think about, we kind of scaffold these concepts and teach them to people. But your approach, this book, it would feel like it would kind of almost bypass that part of the brain that has to rationalize everything and figure it out. Is that sort of what you found in terms of working with people with it?
100%. And I love that you said that too, because it's very heart-centered. It's very focused on the heart. It's also solar plexus, a little bit of the throat too, because I work with chakras. I could just feel what is active when people work through this. But it's really just allowing this aspect of themselves to come out and to be seen because we bury the version of us. And when we allow them to come forward, and to heal and to just be acknowledged, it does something to the energy of everyone who's willing to do that. And in any way they're willing to do that. They don't necessarily have to use my book for it. But yeah, it does serve as a guidance system to, as you say, it just gets right to the heart of it. And why I titled it An Old Soul's Journey, because old souls really struggle. They always choose difficult childhoods. They've done the easy. So I always say it's like taking advanced courses. They're not going to take the easy courses. They've already done it. They've tested out of them. Now they're at that advanced AP level. So they're just signing up for that intense work. But that means they signed up for really tough things to happen to them at young ages. In my case, I had abusive parents and abusive childhood. By the time I got to my teenage years, I didn't want to live anymore. And it didn't mean I wasn't necessarily suicidal, but a lot of old souls are because we get to this place of feeling like others will be better off without us. So those teenagers are the most challenging. So I really like for people to connect with this version of themselves because it's also bringing back these fractured pieces that their soul has left over the lifetime.
Hmm. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, that is very spot on. And now I know I signed up for, I knew that as I mentioned when I was speaking to my dad, I was like, Dad, you signed up for an interesting incarnation, and so did I. Like, what?
Yeah.
But that totally makes sense that this is the curriculum that I chose. So feels very powerful, actually, feels very empowering, even though, as you mentioned, you went through your challenging season with depression and with suicidality in some way. And I went through the gamut of that as well. But now I really recognize that those were really good training grounds for me and for my spiritual richness that I experience now. So, Chris, you are so fantastic. I feel like I could literally chat with you for hours. This was so much fun.
I agree. I appreciate this conversation so much. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for coming on. And it has been such a blessing, such a pleasure. And so I would love to encourage everyone, please go check out Chris's book, An Old Soul's Journey. I'm going to go purchase that today. That is such a cool concept. I love that idea. And even reading it aloud, I know the resonance of your voice. I'm doing a lot of work in terms of the polyvagal theory, those aspects of
Yeah.
humming and singing and chanting. And so now I can add reading a beautiful children's book that will open up my soul. So thank you so much for being here, Chris. And where can people find more of you?
The easiest way to find me is my website, which is my name, chriswasko.com.
chriswasko.com. Perfect.
Yes.
And we'll have the link and everything for that. So thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of the Soul Guided Book Club podcast.